Hello, and thank you so much for joining me once again. So today I have finally some answers to some questions that I received in various Facebook groups. My first video was unusable and half deleted, so now we're here. I like this one a lot better. I didn't have any visuals to go with it though, so I'm just gonna show you a bunch of pictures of my cats and dolls. Why not? And answer some questions while we're at it. So, without further ado, here we go. I've been asked a few times what order you should sew your seams in, and unfortunately there isn't a straight answer. The order you construct something in is going to depend on the thing that you're making. I do try to stick to a general formula, which I'll give you, but sometimes the garment has different needs because one thing just can't be done before another. For doll clothes specifically, I do collars and sleeve hems flat because once they're on the garment, sewing such tiny tubes on a machine becomes nearly impossible. You just can't fit it around the presser foot. So for example, when I stitch together a t-shirt, I'll sew the collar onto the front and back pieces first, hem the sleeves, sew the shoulder seams together, sew the sleeve onto the shirt, sew up the side seams, and then hem the bottom of the shirt. If you wanted, you can hem the bottom before sewing one or both of the side seams, but I find the bottom hem looks nicer if I do it last, and it's a big enough tube that sewing it on the machine is fairly comfortable. There's a lot of room for variation in this formula though. Some people will sew one of the shoulder seams first, then do the collar as one piece before sewing the second shoulder seam. I did that for a while, but found the asymmetry really bothered me. So much of it boils down to personal preference in the end. I've also gotten a question for just general tips on sleeves. As stated before, I highly recommend hemming them before you even sew them onto the garment. Sew them on before you do the side seams so that your working area is as flat as possible. Some sleeves have very tall sleeve caps, and for those I recommend hand basting them before machine stitching. If you're super new to sleeves, you might want to just do this with all sleeves because it makes it a lot easier. I also prefer to sew with the sleeve on the bottom and the garment on top as it's going through the machine, just because I feel like I'm better able to spot potential puckers that way. Go slow and occasionally put your needle down, lift the foot, and readjust your material as you need. It is tricky, and this is probably one of the hardest things on most beginner patterns, so be kind to yourself. You can do it. Moving on to pattern drafting. There's lots of questions about pattern drafting, both in general and for Smart Dolls specifically. This is such a huge question. I'll do my best to give you an overview here, but I'm also going to try to start putting out more videos that are just about my own drafting process. Fair warning though, my drafting is very informal. Sometimes I think it needs to be because Smart Dolls, resin, BJDs, and other vinyl dolls usually break the pattern drafting math by having fairly extreme proportions. So they are kind of a unique challenge in that way. I personally find the easiest way to draft is to create a sloper. A sloper is a very basic pattern that fits the body with little to no ease and can be used as a base for more complicated patterns later. I made my sloper over years of trial and error. I think I'm on version 6 or 7 at this point. There's at least one designer offering their sloper for sale on Etsy though, which I think would be a great place to start if you're a beginner and not really interested in diving straight into the deep end. I'm not able to make patterns for bust sizes that I don't have on hand. I'm extremely picky about fit, and I would prefer to do multiple mock-ups for a project, but a mock-up doesn't do you much good if you haven't got a model to check the fit on. One person did ask, is it safe to use the saran wrap and duct taped method? If you're unfamiliar, that's where you wrap the doll or person in saran wrap, then tape it close to the body with duct tape, cut the whole thing off like a weird cocoon, and make yourself a dress form or pattern block out of it. And honestly, I've tried it. and absolutely damaged my doll in the process. I was very stupid, and when cutting the thing off, I caught the lip of the doll's vinyl bust with the scissors, and I couldn't figure out why they wouldn't cut anymore. I still cringe thinking about it. So no, I wouldn't say it's totally safe. It can be done without damaging a doll, but it's pretty easy to mess up. And for the record, Culture Japan was very sweet and replaced the damaged bust under warranty, even though the damage was 100% my own fault. So I really appreciated that. Another good question I get asked a lot is what materials are good for what kinds of clothes? And honestly, it's a tough one. I still struggle with it. One really good way to start is to figure out what the garment you want to make is usually made out of and just try to replicate that, but in a lighter weight if it's available. As for specifics I've found over the years, jersey knit is a must for t-shirts, and at 1/3 scale you can get away with cannibalizing human t-shirts for material, especially cheap t-shirts, which is kind of nice. Hoodies can also use the same weight jersey knit as t-shirts and still look very nice. I'd even hesitate to use something heavier because the unnecessary bulk would add up really fast on a doll. Denim cannot be swapped for anything else and still look like jeans. However, you can find some surprisingly lightweight denim, and that usually works great. I use a lot of printed quilters cotton because I love the fun prints and patterns, and it works best with gathered skirts, fitted dresses, and button-down shirts. Basically anything that doesn't need to stretch. I've also used it to good effect for jackets because the lining and facings tend to add enough bulk to give it a little bit of a heavier look in a finished product. Now on to sergers, and oh my goodness, I got a lot of questions about sergers. The number one question about sergers and overlock machines is, do you need one? Honestly, that's a very personal question, and in the end, it could totally depend on what you plan to sew a lot of, how much space you have available, and whether or not you even like how it looks. I sew a lot of t-shirts. A lot. They're one of the best sellers on my Etsy, and I really love how they look, so I have to make extras for myself to keep. Honestly, any super stretchy material is a lot easier to finish or sew with a serger, in my opinion. I also have the benefit of room. I didn't always, and that's why it took me so long to finally get a serger. I'm not the kind of crafter that can easily put one machine away and take out the other because 99% of my projects require jumping between both of them multiple times for one garment. I would go crazy having to put one away and drag the other one out each time. And of course, I love the way serged edges look. I think there's been a shift in our perception of them over the years because I've talked to people that always associated them with being cheap. To me, they look clean and tidy without adding too much bulk in the 1/3 scale. It's very much a personal preference though. So in the end, whether or not you feel that you need one is going to kind of be based on some of that, I think. Hopefully that gives you some perspective to decide. Now, I've also gotten questions on my own personal habits using the serger. For instance, whether I use it as the only stitching for the seam or just use it to finish an existing seam that I've sewn on the sewing machine. Most of the seams in my t-shirts can be serged together alone. I find it gives them a little extra give that can make putting them on and taking them off easier. When that give is actually a bad thing though, I'll use the sewing machine to stitch the seam first and then finish the edge with the serger so it doesn't unravel. As an example, you usually don't want your shoulder seams to warp, so this is a good way to keep them the correct width. Additionally, it's easier to be more precise on the sewing machine, so I'll use that to baste a tricky spot before actually serging it. So in the end, how I use the serger is pretty situational and kind of involves thinking about what I need out of any given seam. I've also been asked what settings I use. They are pretty much set at the default. I just use the standard 4-string stitch. I keep the little knife blade knifing and I try not to make it angry. Every single time the tension gets weird, I have to look it up on YouTube and have the various YouTube gurus talk me through the troubleshooting process of fixing it. Unfortunately, I don't think I know enough about it to be an effective teacher, but just searching serger tension gets a lot of really useful results. One of the reasons I keep to the standard 4-string stitch is because on my machine it is almost exactly 1/4 inch wide. It's extremely useful because that's my preferred seam allowance. When I sew with it, I usually don't cut much fabric as I sew because I'm lining the edge of my fabric up with the cutting blade, so it mostly just trims the ragged edges for me. Doing it this way generates a lot of fluff that you need to clean out regularly, but I find it less wasteful and easier to account for on my patterns. And last but not least, is it possible to completely hand sew your doll clothes? Yes, oh my goodness, absolutely. It is not my personal preferred method, but I've seen some of the most beautiful, stunning, hand-sewn outfits you can imagine. Please don't ever let the lack of a machine, whether it's a serger or a regular sewing machine, stop you. Some of the most delicate and beautiful work can be done with hand stitching. Seriously, like anything that can be done on a machine can be done hand stitching. The biggest downfall is just that it's going to be slower. You have so much more precision available to you though, and you have so many stitching options. I'm probably not the best source for those because it's not something I do regularly, but again, YouTube is your friend. You're going to find so many good options if you just search for hand sewing techniques, hand sewing stitches. Please go forth, sew. There is no shame for any form of sewing in this space. I want everybody to be able to sew. And on that note, I think we're done. Thank you so much for joining me. I know this was a little bit of a departure from my normal style of videos, but I thought these were some really excellent questions and I kind of wanted to answer them for you. I hope some of that info will be useful to you. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this or more videos where I actually create stuff, and I hope you have a great day. Bye bye.